Are you new to real estate, or are you just looking for a quick refresher? You've come to the right place. I'm Cheyenne Taraciano, and this is The Road to Sold. Thank you guys for joining me today. The very first part of the disclosures that we're going to be going through are the three biggest disclosures as far as risk reduction goes inside of your real estate transaction. The first document up is your seller property questionnaire. When it comes to all of these disclosures, these are disclosures that are going to be delivered by the seller delivered from the seller to the buyer. Now, if you're representing the listing side of the transaction, you actually don't want to assist the seller with filling out these documents. These are disclosures for the seller to begin filling out to provide to the buyer. They're supposed to figure out any information they're aware of with the property and then transfer that awareness of the property to the buyer when they're purchasing. The seller has a total of 7 days to deliver all of the disclosures necessary to the buyer inside of a real estate transaction. Your seller property questionnaire is a very bulky questionnaire. It's a 4-page document, but it defines and describes anything and everything that has happened to that property while the seller happened to own the property. It's going to ask your seller a variety of questions of whether or not they're aware of something that may exist within the home. If they're not aware of whether or not something exists in the home, then they would simply check no, that they don't have any awareness of that particular issue when they're filling out the SPQ. Now, it's very important to recognize that every single box needs to be completed. So if for some reason there's a box that has been left empty, this document is actually considered incomplete. So it has to be completed. There can be no empty boxes on this document because it means that it was an incomplete document, and therefore it has to go back for revision to the seller in the transaction. So for you as the listing agent, or if you're the buyer's agent, what you're doing is you're reading through all the information that was provided to you and verifying whether or not the document has been completed or not. If you're the buyer's agent and there's some missing boxes, you can request that the seller complete those items and deliver them back to you, would be the correct way to handle it. Now, what you want to make sure is happening when this document is being completed is you're filling out all of these spaces. So on the top half, you're going to make sure that you have all of the seller's information on the top, and you're going to start going through the are you aware of through all pages of the document. So are you aware of these items? If there is a yes box checked, they have to provide a description. So let's say under item number 6A, if they were to check yes, then under the comment section, they would need to make sure that they put why they checked yes. There needs to be an explanation. So same thing, if you receive a document that has a yes box checked, but there's no explanation, then you also need to send that back for revision. Your buyers need to be aware of why the box was checked yes. So they would put any notes inside of this seller disclosure to the buyer. Another thing to note when we're talking about the seller disclosures that are being provided to the buyer is a lot of times the sellers are very wary when they're completing these documents. They don't like to say negative defects that might exist in the home because they're afraid they're going to scare the buyer away and the buyer is going to no longer want to purchase the property. However, this isn't the right viewpoint for the sellers to take. When your buyers first get their offer accepted, they're excited about purchasing this home. They want it to be theirs. So the seller to disclose all facts quickly in the transaction will make sure the buyer has that information ahead of time, and the buyer's usually going to be okay with whatever's placed inside these disclosures because they have so much excitement that they finally got their offer accepted. What you actually don't want to see happen is you don't want to get the middle of the transaction on day 15 to day 20 when the buyer's starting to get frustrated. They're getting their inspections back. Maybe their timelines aren't being met. Something might be happening within the transaction that it's starting to feel a little bit more uncomfortable for them. If they get negative news in the middle of the transaction, they're going to be far more likely to be frustrated at that point. So you definitely want to hit these disclosures quickly, upfront, and fast if you're representing the seller. Like I said, the seller has 7 days to deliver all disclosures to the buyer for the buyer to be able to review. My recommendation, though, is to have all of these disclosures prepared to provide to the buyer within the first few days that escrow is open. You want to make sure that you're disclosing upfront and fast. If you have a buyer that walks away from a transaction within the first 3 to 5 days, that's okay. Your seller can deal with that. Your seller is even going to be frustrated if you have a buyer that walks away from a transaction by day 15 to day 20. So you want to disclose all of these items and you want to be as thorough as you possibly can. These documentations are also great for risk reduction for the buyer and for the seller. If the seller discloses any defects that they may be aware of or anything that they might consider negative about the property, then they're covering themselves and protecting themselves, because once the buyer moves in, if they were to find this out with the first 6 months or a year, that they may have had a problem with water intrusion into the property, or maybe they have some other problem with the property with the roof or something, that's going to lead to something that could be a potential lawsuit later or land you in mediation and arbitration, which is never a place that you want to be in. So definitely make sure your seller takes the time to be very thorough when filling out this seller property questionnaire, your SPQ. The other thing that's very important is a lot of times our agents, in their efforts to be thorough with their clients and to expedite the process, you guys may want to step in and help them with this. You may want to even fill it out for them and just have them sign it. I've had some of our agents say that they have actually walked them through it. They've checked all the boxes for them and then just had the sellers sign the bottom of the document. You don't want to put yourself in that position. This is not a form for you as the agent to fill out or assist with, regardless of any position that your seller may be in. This is for them to complete and to return to you. So at the bottom of every single page, you're going to have an initial on your SPQ. On the very last page, you're going to have your signature, a signature for the seller and a signature for the buyer. Now, this is also a space where you can say that you might have additional comments. So if everything the seller wants to discuss there's not enough lines available for them to discuss that, it would be excellent for them to check a box and attach additional documentation to this SPQ. One of the things that we're going to see rolling out this year in 2024, probably with our June, July revision of documents, is that one of the things that they're revising is that if you're a flip property, so if you are an investor who's bought the property and resold that property, you have to provide the buyer a list of every single item that was repaired along with this property. Now, that is something that's supposed to be inclusive inside this SPQ. But clearly, there's no way that you could fit every single remodel item within the lines that are provided on the SPQ. So you're going to want to make sure, if you're representing a flip client, that you're going to take the time to attach additional documentation. This could be just a breakdown of everything that was done to the home. It can be the quotes from the contractor of what was actually done to the property. But don't be afraid to use the additional comments section for full disclosure on the SPQ. Okay, next up is the real estate transfer disclosure statement. This is a document, again, that has to be completed by the seller, delivered to the buyer within the first 7 days of the transaction. At the very top, you're going to make sure there's no blank lines. Remember, a blank line is an incomplete document, even if it comes down to something as simple as the date or the county being incomplete. It has to be completed on the top. Under item number 1, coordination with other disclosures. A lot of people get confused about this section. Most likely, your sellers are going to be checking the box that says there's no substituted disclosures for this transfer. It's the bottom box on line item number 1. However, what this is actually asking the seller to provide is if there has been any sort of a report that they want to include with the TDS as a supplemental form of documentation that would be attached to this TDS. So for example, if they have gotten any sort of a report or an inspection, they could say, yes, I do have an additional inspection report or disclosure, and they can list it by checking that second box. So for example, if they had a termite inspection done on the home within the past 30, 60 days, they might want to include that as a supplemental document included here on the TDS. That's where you could place that line item. If the seller has no additional documentation, no unusual inspection or report to note, then they simply check the box no substituted disclosures for this transfer. Under item number 2 on your TDS, the first section is going to say whether or not the seller is or is not occupying the property. So are they living in this home? Yes or no? Yes, they're occupying it. No, they're not occupying it. Item number 8, they need to go through and check all of the boxes that apply to their particular property. So they would check a box for all of these items that are going to be included with the property and transferring to the buyer. If they don't know, again, they're supposed to leave it blank. So this is an are you aware of these items? If they are unaware, they can leave these items blank. I want you guys to pay special attention, though, on your TDS to the utilities that are listed on your TDS. So one of the things is that your TDS is going to describe whether or not you're on a public sewer system or whether you're on a septic tank. Some of those basic systems, you want to make sure that they have selected which way is the correct way for their property, because that's a big line item of disclosure that you want to make sure is very clear. Other items like whether or not they have window screens is a bit more vague. Maybe they only have window screens on half the property, so they don't know what to check for that line item. So they might leave it blank because they have some but not all. That's okay. When it comes to utilities, they should know what utilities are on this home. And this is one of the line items that, as an agent, I would also want to double check, because this is the seller's disclosure of whether or not it has these items that are listed on the property. And the utilities are kind of a big one. So you want to double check that those are listed accurately for what you're aware of on this property. On the bottom, they're going to be putting whether or not there's exhaust fans, where the fireplace is, whether or not what the roof type is, and what the age of the roof is approximately, if they're aware of it. They could also put unknown if they don't know, or if they don't feel like if they can fill that out correctly. The bottom of it is, are you, the seller, aware of any defects in the above? So let's say that they might happen to have a trash compactor, but the trash compactor doesn't work. So they might check the box trash compactor. On the bottom, they say the trash compactor is not in working condition. That's what they'd put on the bottom of item number 2. On page 2, item number B, it says, are you aware of any significant defects or malfunctions in any of the following? And they would check yes or no. This happens to do with the walls, ceilings, floor, insulation. This is more of the structural items with the house, whether or not they're aware that they've had any problems. And if there are any problems with that, they need to list the problems in the lines below. Next up is the seller, are you aware of, again, any of the following? And they need to check the box yes or no. So substances, materials, or products which are environmental hazards, they would probably be checking no. One of the things that you will see that most of the time they should be checking yes for is whether or not they share their property lines with anybody. And yes, they should share property lines. They are sharing a fence, they're sharing a block wall, they are sharing something with their neighbors. So that's very frequently a box that could be checked yes. But they need to take their time, read these boxes, check yes or no. Again, if it's blank, it is incomplete. The document is not completed. It needs to be returned, and that box needs to be checked correctly. If they check yes to any of these items, they would list the items here. One of the actions that I want you guys to get very familiar with as agents working inside of transactions is the way that you're wording things, or the way that the seller is wording things. So if they checked yes to 3 different things, let's say they checked yes to item number 1, 3, and 5, just random items there. Under the explanation, they would put number 1 and why they checked it yes. Then number 3, why they checked that yes. Be very clear as to what yes you're responding to, so that there's no chance or no gray area left within your disclosures. You always want to make sure that everything makes 100% sense and there's no room for questions inside of your real estate transaction. So get used to using your paragraph numbers when you're responding to things like this. On the bottom, you're going to make sure your seller is going to be signing this and dating it. And then we're going to move on to page 3. Page 3 is your agent disclosure. Now, you are required as agents to do a diligent inspection of the home, your visual inspection. It's a requirement for you as an agent to note anything that you're aware of that might be either a defect or just something you noted as an agent when selling this home. And there's reasons for this. One, your buyers aren't real estate professionals. They're not contractors usually. They don't know what we see on a day-to-day basis. But sometimes you do note things that they may be unaware of, and you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I need to note this about the property. This shows that you are doing your due diligence as the agent, and you're not just randomly unlocking a door and writing an offer. What this is trying to verify, if your transaction gets called into a mediator or an arbitrator into a full-on court case, is that you are diligent in practicing real estate. So you're required to walk through this property and note things about the property to show that you did your job thoroughly. And this is part of your job. Now, if there are no items to note, you can check that there are no items to note. But that's very risky to do as far as a real estate agent goes, because if you do get called into some type of a litigation later or some type of court case later, you're going to have to define why it was that you can show that you were an excellent agent representing your client. So if you click that there's no items to note, and then come to find out there was an item that you should have noted, they're going to say, you know what, you weren't very complete and thorough in your job as an agent because you didn't even see this item. How could you miss this particular item? This is a pretty big thing to note. So you want to show that you actually are doing your job and taking it seriously as an agent, and you want to note any items that are unusual or that stand out to you. So you can do this in 3 different ways. You can put that there are no items to note. We do not recommend that you do that. The other way you could do it is agent notes the following items. Maybe the house is incredibly clean. So you could say agent notes the following items. The home is a new construction home that has never been lived in. And you could place 1 or 2 notes in there to show your diligence if it's extremely, extremely clean. And then you could say that you might not have any items to note for that particular reason. So if you have an incredibly clean home, your agent visual disclosure is obviously going to be a very clean visual disclosure. You could just use the TDS. Now, we like to see you use the AVID, which is your Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure Form. It's going to talk about how you're not a licensed contractor. We don't have the obligation to climb on top of the roof to verify that the roof is in good condition. We're not electricians, we're not plumbers. It's not our obligation to say whether a system is in good working order or is in poor working order. That's not the point of this form. This is just something that's a visual inspection, and you're not really held as far as accountability goes to the working systems and components that are inside of the house. It's just showing diligence that you did, in fact, show this property, and you did, in fact, pay attention to every single room within the house. That's the goal of this particular form. So, as you fill out this form, every single line needs to be complete at the top of this. So your inspection is completed by, you're going to have your real estate firm there. You need the date and time, the weather conditions, and persons present. If there's no people present, you could put NA or none. As you go through the room, the only thing that I would say that you never do is write good condition or great condition, because then you're actually vouching for the condition of the home. So you're not supposed to use describing words. Think no adjectives. It's not our job to use adjectives when we're filling out this form or describing words. We're noting items without the describing words. So the only thing you never want to do is you never want to say good condition or great condition. So let's say you happen to be in the dining room, and the dining room looks like it's in good shape. It looks like it is in good condition. There's no problems with the walls. There's no problems with the baseboards that you see. There's nothing that you can actually think of to note. Under that line item, you would put no items noted, and that's it. You're not going to talk about whether the condition is good or bad. You're going to say no items noted. Same thing if you happen to be in a house that needs a ton of work. Maybe this is a property that should be a fix and flip property. It needs completely remodeled and renovated. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. There's holes in the wall. There's damage to the sinks and the bathtubs. The fiberglass is dented and cracked. There's problems everywhere. There's broken windows. You would note these items in the most basic form that you can. So if you have a crack or a broken window in the dining room, you would say item number 1. Crack noted in window or damage noted to window. You're not going to say what size the damage is. You're not going to say how big it is. You're not going to say big crack noted in the window or big hole noted in the wall. What's your definition of big? Your definition of big and somebody else's definition of big are 2 completely different things. Same thing with saying small hole noted in the wall. You're not going to say big. You're not going to say small. There's no describing words. You're just going to say holes noted on east wall, or whatever the case may be. You want to describe the wall where the damage is noted. Note the item without descriptive factors. You're never going to say good, you're never going to say great, and you're not going to use describing words. If there's nothing to note, you put no items noted. Those are the big things when it comes to filling out your AVID, to fill this AVID out correctly. Now, Sometimes people will say, okay, well, the house is extremely clean. And as far as a risk reduction point of view, I'd like to do this AVID, but every single item says no item noted. Well, there are some things that you can choose to note if you'd like to, as far as doing due diligence. And some of the things that I've kind of referred to in the past is whether or not there are screens noted on some of the windows, whether or not there's landscaping in the front or backyards. There's some basic items that you could pay attention to say what to describe that you have been inside of this home. And that's what you would do inside of your AVID for all of the pages that are involved. And then you get to your page 3. And you're going to have spots for other, and you can add additional rooms that would be inside of the house. And you would just add, let's say that there is a loft upstairs. So under other, I would write loft, and then I would put my items next to it. So I try to note which particular room it is that I'm talking to. Even on bedrooms, I put bedroom number 1, bedroom number 2, bedroom number 3, primary bedroom. So you know that you're noting which bedrooms that these things happened to be existing inside of. Another thing that I like to do when it comes to my AVID is I like to take pictures of the damage or of all the rooms, because I feel like sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I know if my transaction is ever going to get called into arbitration or mediation later, that not only did I have my AVID, but I actually have some picture documentation of it. And this might sound like it's a little bit more work for you, but I find that it actually makes my job far easier if I have pictures. What normally ends up happening is you show the property, but you can't remember the damage on all of these particular spots. So I want you to picture being a buyer's agent. If I'm the buyer's agent, normally I fill out my AVID when I do the home inspection. That happens pretty quickly within the transaction. During the home inspection, I do a quick walkthrough of the home. I snap a picture of every room. And then as I'm walking through with the home inspector or my buyers, and I note certain scratches or damage to the property, like a broken window, I snap a picture really quick on my cell phone. Then when I get back to the house or my computer, I can sit down very quickly and go through those pictures, swiping through them pretty fast to note the damage that I noted. And I like to do it that way. That's my preferred manner of doing my AVID. And I would do the same thing with my listing if I was representing the seller. So whenever I wouldn't do it at a listing appointment, but whenever I have the opportunity to do it pretty quietly on my own, I would snap those pictures really quickly and then fill out my AVID later so that I could remember everything that I noted about the property. So you're going to complete this AVID, and this AVID must be attached to your TDS. This is a big thing that we see agents doing incorrectly. So you guys know that the seller is supposed to deliver this TDS to your buyers within the first 7 days. Well, page 3 of the TDS says that it's only complete if your agent visual inspection disclosure is done. So if you're in a transaction and the seller was a great seller and they gave you their TDS and they checked the box AVID is attached, but the agent has not actually done that AVID, then you have an incomplete TDS. This is a big one. So you can kind of hold this if you'd like to as bargaining power within your transaction at a later point in time to say, hey, you never finished completing your TDS. So when they're asking you to remove contingencies at a later point in time, you get to say, you still haven't completed your agent visual inspection disclosure. That was due in connection with the TDS, and you didn't deliver it to me on time. So I can't remove my contingencies until I have that AVID in my hands. This AVID is supposed to be attached to the DDS and delivered at the same time with your TDS. And it's one of the things that we see agents that are not doing it correctly, and they deliver these AVIDs at the very end of the transaction, which is not the right way to do these AVIDs. So make sure if you're the listing agent that when you send the TDS, your AVID is completed and attached along with that TDS immediately when you deliver, okay? Now we're going to move on to the disclosures that are provided at the time of the offer. Most of these disclosures are going to be pulling up automatically within your Zip Forms account when the purchase agreement is created. So most of the time, the buyer's agent is going to be creating all of these disclosures when they're submitting their offer to you, because they're supposed to be pre-disclosed, meaning it should be disclosed before the offer or at the bare minimum at the time of the offer. So what they're trying to accomplish is that the dates that are listed on these disclosures coincide with the dates that are listed on the purchase contract because they're required to be pre-disclosed. This is why the dates on these forms happen to be important. So you want to make sure that they're delivered at the time of offer, which the buyer's agent's going to naturally do because it's going to pull up with your zip forms. So let's go through what these pre-disclosures are supposed to be. The first one up is a newer disclosure. This is not actually pulling up with the purchase agreement, and this is not formally required within your transaction quite yet. But this is a hot button inside real estate. This form is called your anticipated broker compensation disclosure, or your ABCD. Whether you guys are aware of what's going on nationally speaking as far as compensation goes, or you're unaware of it, there are going to be some changes with the way that buyers agents are compensated potentially within the state of California. And what it comes down to is there's no change really to your compensation. Everything is remaining the same. What is changing is the disclosure requirements of the commission. Now, it's pretty standard in the state of California that the sellers are going to be paying the agent from their proceeds to the buyer's agent. They put it in the MLS as a cooperating fee, and you have that inside the multiple listing service, and they put whether or not you're going to be earning 2%, 2.5%, or 3%, and that is on the MLS. There's a second way that we could also do this, and this is on your CB, and that will also list where the commission can be at. Now, what they're wanting to make sure is fully disclosed is that the buyers and the sellers are aware of any fees that are in existence within the real estate transaction. So this is really not a big surprise that a disclosure is required for how much you're making. It's required in every single business that you happen to go to, that the price is listed for what they're actually going to be doing. That's what the ABCD is attempting to do, is to define what the compensation happens to be. So this form we're going to start filling out, and you're just going to make sure it's included at the time of your offer. If you were to actually read the form, it says that you could do this with every single property that you show. So if you're showing property A, then they're wanting you to say the commission I would get on this house is 2.5%. Then you show property B, and then they say, well, the commission on this house was 3%, and the next house is 2%, or whatever the case may be. That is not required right now, but you are at least required to submit the fees that are associated with what your compensation is going to be at the time of offer. Now, this is not a full requirement as of right now, but it is coming. So we're going to start doing this right now, and it's a good recommendation that you practice it. You want to always disclose a fee that's associated, which kind of makes common sense. So at the top of this, you're going to be filling this out with all of the information, and you're going to say that you're going to let them know what the prices are going to be that you're going to be earning. You have the buyer sign the top half of the form, letting them know that you're making this disclosure, that you're going to be earning a commission, and how that commission is paid. The second half of the form, the grid that's in the center, it says the section is to be filled out when the property is being shown or when an offer is being made. So you would want to fill this out, in my suggestion, when your offer is being made. So your buyers would initial the left-hand side. You'd write the property address of the property that they're going to be writing the offer on, and you're going to do either the first date of shown or the date the offer was made. I would go with the date the offer was made, the percentage that you're going to be receiving, and you can put the source. Your source is it's coming from your MLS or the form CBC, your cooperating broker compensation form. There's 2 ways that can happen. Now, I do anticipate us seeing some modifications and changes to potentially this ABCD form and to the way that we're doing our buyer broker agreements, but I don't anticipate those are going to happen before the June-July release. So we may see this form change slightly, some verbiage on it, but for right now, you want to make sure that you're going to be including this when you write an offer and what the commission is going to be in coordination with that particular offer when you're writing the offer. So it's pretty simple, actually. It's just disclosure of fees, and you're going to fill that out in the grid in the center, and you're going to make sure that everything is signed. There is a very little buyer initial form at the bottom kind of hanging out down there, so don't forget that little initial section that's at the bottom. Okay, next up, we have our real estate, our disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. This is also known as your AD. And what this is saying is it's going to define your agency relationship. So again, you're sending out agency prior to your offer being written because you want the dates to be included of what representation happens to be. So it's going to describe the duties of a seller's agent, of a listing agent to the seller, of a buyer's agent to the buyer, and what dual agency means. And that's what it's defining right here. The basics of this entire form, when you're describing it to your clients, is that you have a fiduciary responsibility to act in their best interest. You're going to be open, you're going to be honest, and you're going to be fair dealing throughout the entire transaction. We're working with integrity. That's the basis of this entire form within this transaction. And it breaks it down into those 3 different spots, whether or not you're the seller's agent, buyer's agent, or representing both buyer and seller. It's just our obligations as agency to our clients. Now, page 2 is the civil codes that define our responsibilities. So this is just a carryover page. If you want to take the time to read it, you can, but it's the civil codes that match up with agency. Kind of interesting on the agency form that I want to actually point out for you because it could be helpful within your transaction. It's not necessary to define this to your clients. You can use this if you need to, but if you go down, this is a very small print. But you go down towards the center of the form where you see some of these blank spots right here. Item number, it's the civil code 2079.15 states, in any circumstance which the seller or buyer refuses to sign an acknowledgement or a receipt of something pursuant to section 207914, the agent shall set forth, sign, and date a written declaration of the facts and of that refusal. This is an interesting civil code that's kind of buried in here, but it's very handy for you guys as agents. When you're dealing with your buyers and sellers, sometimes they're going to refuse to disclose something, or they've really received something, you've presented them something, and they refuse to acknowledge it, a cancellation or a notice of buyer to perform. They refuse to acknowledge that those things were actually delivered or that something might be happening within the transaction. Your buyer or seller's refusal to participate in the transaction or to meet these timelines does not change your obligations as a realtor, that you have a duty to make sure that you're managing timelines as well. That's part of being open, honest, and fair dealing. Like this, something is occurring that your party is choosing not to participate within. You can document that within your transaction. So you can even tell your sellers and buyers, look, I understand where you're coming from, but we still have an obligation to be honest and fair dealing. And in fact, there's civil codes that match up with our obligations as an agent to make sure that this is actually happening in a timely manner. Time is of the essence as being an agent. So this is your agency disclosure, and just a little fun fact on page 2 that might help you in your real estate transactions later. Okay, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Although that you're getting this at the time of offer, this is a pre-disclosure really. So it's going to be dated at the time of offer, but you're supposed to tell your clients, like, there's always a possibility that we could have dual agency. Our brokerage could represent both the listing side and the selling side, which sometimes can have benefits for them as well. So there's the possible representation of more than one agent. Now, obviously, when you're writing the offer, you know whether you have dual agency or not, but this form defines what dual agency is, and your buyers and your sellers can read what dual agency is in case you have any questions on what it means to be a dual agent with the brokerage. Now, dual agency is if the listing broker is the same as the buyer's brokerage, it's dual agency. So if the firm that you're working with is the same firm as the buyer's agent firm, then you have dual agency. It doesn't matter who the individual agent is. So if I, Cheyenne Traciano, represent the listing side and the buying side, I have dual agency because I'm with the same brokerage, plus I'm also the same agent. Those are two different manners. Dual agency just means it's the same brokerage. Okay. Next up is your California Consumer Privacy Act advisory, disclosure, and notice. Now, this is an interesting form that's a newer form that's included in your purchase agreements, and it says that, for consumer privacy, they have the right to protect their privacy. There's a lot of data that's passed back and forth within a transaction, and your clients do have privacy rights. So if there's something that they would prefer us to keep as private as possible, or they're asking us something to keep their information as private as possible, some of those things we can do. But there are some things that we cannot do, which is what the form is describing towards the bottom of it. We are legally required as a brokerage to keep a lot of forms and documents within our office within a specified period of time, legally speaking. So are multiple listing services. So are other firms that are involved with us, escrow companies, title companies. They have obligations and requirements that they maintain documents for a specified period of time. So although we obviously are going to protect the consumer's privacy, we are required to keep these documents in file for the legal required time. All right, your buyer's investigation advisory. This is an advisory to the buyers. So you have a seller's obligation to disclose. That's always your seller's obligation. They have to tell you anything and everything that exists within the property. And they're doing that by the first 3 forms that we've discussed today. They're doing that via your TDS and their SPQ and a variety of inspections and disclosures. Well, what I love about the BIA is it's telling the buyer that although the seller has the responsibility to disclose all known items about a property, the buyer has an equal obligation to verify the accuracy and that they're content with those inspections and disclosures. They cannot rely on just the seller's opinion or advice based upon what they know about this property. They have an obligation to make sure that they are satisfied as a buyer, that the information that they have received is something that they're happy with. That's a buyer obligation. So this is an excellent form because it's saying, hey, look, we're going to disclose everything that we know, but I want you to pay special attention to every single item that's noted in paragraph 3. You need to verify that you're happy with the systems and the components, that we verify wood destroying pest or the water or soil stability if they're concerned about it. You need to verify the building permits. We're not just going to take what the seller says at face value. Like, that might not be accurate information. We need to double check everything on this property. And you, Mr. Buyer, have the obligation of doing that. Now, as the agent, if you're the buyer's agent, we're going to help them discover this information by ordering a series of reports and inspections, like the termite inspection, your home inspection, maybe a roof inspection. Those are all things that you guys are going to help them or facilitate getting them more information about the property or verifying the accuracy of the information that you've received to date. On the bottom of that form, they're just going to sign and acknowledge that they understand that responsibility. Next up is the Fair Appraisal Act Addendum. This is a pretty simple one. So not only do we as real estate agents have the duty to make sure that we are being fair to all parties involved within a real estate transaction, we also have to let them know that the appraiser also has that obligation. So if they feel like for any reason that they may have been discriminated against during this appraisal process, this has nothing to do with value, by the way. It's not a value proposition. It's a discriminatory proposition where the appraiser may have been discriminating for some sort of a reason against the client. Okay, next up is your buyer's homeowner's insurance advisory. Insurance in the state of California has been changing drastically over the past few years. There are a lot of insurance companies that are actually pulling out of the state of California, but there are a sizable amount of insurance companies that are still issuing insurance policies within the state. However, all of the changes that are being made surrounding the insurance might make it a little bit trickier for your buyers to find the insurance, to price the insurance, and there's some more additional steps that they may have to take in order to achieve getting insurance in a timely manner within their transaction. And this form is going to tell them that they need to start shopping as quickly as possible. So the number 1 item is going to say they need to obtain their insurance quickly and efficiently and ahead of time. Item number 2 is property insurance and purchase contract terms. So it's going to have specific contingencies for them to find the insurance within for their home within a specified period of time. So if they go over their contingencies or they have not shopped for their insurance within their contingency periods, then it's going to be challenging for them to be able to walk away from a transaction if they're not satisfied with the outcome of the insurance quotes that they happen to be getting. So this is talking about the different conditions that are existing around the insurance challenges that we have in the state of California right now. The second thing that you want to pay special attention to if you're a buyer who's purchasing a property is that insurance companies are requiring an additional information about homes as well. So it's not quite as simple as just getting a quote and it's fast and easy and over the phone. I've had insurance companies that will often say, I need additional pictures. We have to have you take a picture of the front of the home. We need to know exactly what the roof looks like on the home. How close is the fire hydrant on the home? They're asking for pictures of different components within the property. So if they're going to be triggering a different sort of inspection or different sorts of requirements for you guys to get as agents or the buyers to get on these properties, it's going to take a little bit more time than it used to take to get homeowners insurance. So we want to make sure that they're shopping for their insurance as quickly as possible. All right, next up is fair housing and discrimination advisory. Of course, we are not supposed to be discriminating against anybody for any reason inside of our real estate transactions. And it notes in the grid all of the things that we are not allowed to be discriminating against. But let's just make this easy. There should be no reason that we're discriminating against anybody for any sort of reason whatsoever. But not only that, but there are other people who need to comply with these required housing laws as well. And it lists in item number 7 all of the people that we need to make sure are not discriminating inside of this transaction, which includes our sellers in the transaction. So if you have a seller who happens to have some sort of discriminatory practices, or they've said something to you that might be a little bit on the discriminating side, it's important that they understand that this fair housing doesn't just obligate us, it obligates the sellers as well. We have to make sure that there's no discrimination that's going to exist within the transaction. And sometimes there may be a little bit of some confusion about what discriminatory actions could be perceived as. And as you roll to the bottom of the form, if you look at paragraph 9, it's going to define some things that may be considered discrimination that you may not be aware of, or that the seller may not be aware of. So if you're curious about the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory, I would ask you to read paragraph 9, and on page 2, read all of these examples of what could be considered discriminatory practices. I do see that sometimes as agents, when we're filling out the MLS, we may even be using some of these discriminatory practices in the verbiage that you're using on the multiple listing service under agent showing remarks or under the public remarks. And those are watched pretty carefully. So take an opportunity and read through of what remarks could be considered discriminatory. Next up is wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. Now, we have a lot of fraud in the industry when it comes to wires. We have a lot of fraud when it comes to our monetary system in general right now. There are people out there constantly trying to search for ways that they could intercept wires and have it rerouted to a bank account that is their own bank account. And you do see this very frequently. It's important that the buyers understand that anytime they're going to be sending a wire, which is going to be sent to the closing company or your escrow company, that they verify the accuracy of the account number and the routing number direct with the escrow company prior to sending the wire. What we frequently will see these scammers try to do is change one letter in the escrow company's email address, just one letter. So it will look and feel like it came directly from the escrow company, but in fact it didn't. And they're changing the routing numbers and the wiring information, and those funds are getting rerouted to an account that's not the escrow holder's account. So a lot of times people will think, well, okay, well, isn't that covered by fraud, or isn't that covered by insurance where this money might be taken away and being sent somewhere else? But the fact of the matter is it is not covered by insurance because it was not officially sent from the escrow company. Someone is committing fraud in these actions, so it's not covered. The only time anything would be considered covered is if the buyer makes a phone call direct to the escrow company and verifies the information for the routing number and the account number. Okay, next up, we're going to be talking about our if and then disclosures. There are some disclosures that are not required in your real estate transaction unless something else happens in your real estate transaction. And usually that's based upon the age of the home. So I call them the if then disclosures of things that you would have to include. Now, the first one up happens to be the hazards booklets. Now, if you are inside zip forms, there's a drop down that'll take you to the California e-publications notice. And in this drop down, it has 6 different forms that we highly recommend that you email directly from zip forms to the buyer. It's going to discuss all of the different things that could be considered hazardous or that the buyer should be paying special attention to on the home. Now, this booklet is really only required for homes that were built prior to 1960. But I highly recommend, and so does the Department of Real Estate, that you just send the booklet every single time on every single transaction, because it's a great disclosure that gives the buyers a great resource when they want to go reference anything about the property. So the form that you would need signed to verify that this was actually sent happens to be this form that you see on your screen right now. It's the last signature page showing that the buyer has received a copy of this disclosure packet that went out. And this is the form that you would happen to see. It is an if-then disclosure, but we recommend that you do this on every single transaction and include this with every single transaction. Next up is your wildfire disaster advisory. If the property is located within a disaster advisory zone, you're going to want to include the wildfire disaster area advisory. So how do you know if you're in a wildfire zone or not? This is going to be disclosed on your natural hazard zone disclosure if it is in some type of advisory area. So you're either in a wildfire disaster area, or you could be in a high or a very high fire zone. This would be disclosed within the NHD. So if it's disclosed that you're in a wildfire disaster area, you would include this form along with your disclosures. So you would do that based upon what the NHD is going to describe. And it tells you all of the risks or concerns about buying a property that may be located in a wildfire area and what your buyers may be challenged with by buying a property that exists inside of one of those areas, and what the advisories are that are required to be disclosed if you're in that area. So this is page 1 and 2. You would just sign it and turn it in with your property. Next up is your fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum. Inside of this particular form, I want you to pay special attention to paragraph 1. This form is only required if you are located in a high or a very high fire hazard zone. So you would include this form if your NHD says you're in a high or very high fire hazard zone, and you can find that on your NHD as well. But not just that. It's not just high fire and a high fire zone. When you read paragraph 1, you can read whether you have to have all 4 of the items that are listed within the defensible space items here to complete sections 2 and or sections 3. Now, this form can be very confusing. It's very confusing even if you've been in the business for a very long period of time. But what I do love about this form is it comes with this defensible space decision tree. So if you're having a client that is in a high fire hazard zone, what they can do is refer to this defensible space decision tree, and it's going to guide them and help them fill out every single section of that fire hardening form. Now, another thing that I want you guys to pay special attention to is that because insurance is changing so much, we're even seeing boundary lines shifting as to what they're considering a high fire hazard zone or not a high fire hazard zone. So if you happen to be in an area that's mountainous or that might have some potential for fire hazards form, by providing this form even up front and having the people sign it, even if you're not necessarily in a very high fire hazard zone, it is a good disclosure. And you can note, hey, we're not in a high fire hazard zone at this point in time or whatever. And you can provide this form to them because some areas may be kind of close to a zone that might be issued. So you can use this form if you'd like to. There are ways that you can determine that you're in a high fire hazard zone. Again, your NHD should list this, but on these forms, it's going to give you the direct websites that you can go to and type in the property addresses to see if you're in a high fire hazard zone or not, and whether or not these forms are required. Okay, next up is a lead-based paint. This form is going to be required within your transaction if your house is built pre-1978. So if you're pre-1978, you would include lead-based paint hazards. Lead-based paint hazards form that's on screen right now is also included in zip forms in your California publications. So just like the earthquake hazard form, there are 6 different sections inside that disclosure, and lead-based paint is one of them. So it's going to define all of the concerns to your clients inside that e-publications form, and then this is the CAR form that's going to coincide with that would need the signature for your transaction. Okay. Next up, we're going to go to some more general advisories and disclosures. Now, every single office in the state of California is going to have different requirements of whether or not these forms are going to be required inside their particular brokerage or not required. Now, The California Association of Realtors has created these forms as a protectionary measure for us as agents to use inside of our transactions. There are a lot of people who don't like to use additional disclosures, but we want to try to give you as much protection as you can within a transaction, and to also give our sellers and our buyers as much information as we can when it comes to buying and selling real estate in the state of California. These are the disclosures that are highly recommended, and we use them in our brokerage, and that I like to see you guys using your transactions. And we're going to walk through why they would be important in your guys' transactions for you. The first one is market conditions advisory. Now, this form is pretty self-explanatory. Markets go up and markets go down. We as agents are not responsible for what happens to the market. This is out of our control. We're real estate agents. It's not our job to predict what's going to happen inside of any sort of given real estate market. And we can't even really give advice as to what's going to be happening inside any real estate market, because that's not what we're licensed to do. So we're letting them know that they should be buying this house based upon their own opinions for what's right for them and their financial situation at any given time. And that we are not the ones who are the responsible for parties for making this decision, that it's clearly up to the buyers and the sellers to come up with what pricing is going to exist, and where they're going to meet the price at through the close of escrow. So the market conditions advisory is just saying that markets go up, markets go down, and it's up to them to be the deciding factor on whether or not they would like to purchase the property at any given price. Okay? Next up is your statewide buyer and seller advisory. You have to select that you're going to include this document inside your purchase agreement under other addenda, and I believe that's on page 4 of your residential purchase agreement. Your statewide buyer and seller advisory is just like your buyer's inspection advisory, the BIA, that we've already gone through, that's included with your purchase contract. The big difference is that the statewide buyer and seller advisory is a 15-page document. So it's going to go through each and every system and component within the house, or every single thing that the buyer could possibly inspect. I highly recommend that we include this form with every transaction, because it lays out some more of the buyer's obligations of some of the things that they should be inspecting and why they should be inspecting that. It's basically pages and pages of small paragraph disclosures to the buyers that they need to pay special attention to. So page 2 is the table of contents that'll break down what all of these different line items are. So as we're going through this, you can see that all of these are going to be, most of these items in your statewide buyer and seller advisory are going to be done through the different inspections that we order for our clients. So if you're ordering a home inspection, a termite inspection, your appraisal, it's going to go through a lot of these different items already, but there's still other items that they may not be covered by the inspections that we're ordering. So the buyer needs to pay special attention to all of these different things and have the obligation to make sure that they're reviewing them. So for example, if you have a property that's on a septic system and you are disclosed that it's on a septic system, they're going to want to order a septic inspection, and they should probably order a septic inspection. They're not required to order an inspection report for every single one of these line items, but it's saying, hey, you have the obligation to make sure that this is true and accurate and correct and that you're happy. So some of the things are like square footage, lot size, and boundaries. Verify that the information in the MLS is correct. You can double check that on your appraisal, but there's other places that you want to double check your square feet. Look if there's water intrusion. Are you on a well? It talks about fire hardening again. So even if you, for example, are not in a high fire hazard zone and you don't want to use your high fire hazard disclosure, you're not required to. You shouldn't be using it if you're not in a high fire hazard zone. But we have a lot of disclosures that are happening inside this SBSA. For example, that fire hardening is here in SBSA. So it's going to go through and break down almost every single disclosure and report really well inside this SBSA to help provide some protection to you guys. So you're just going to have your buyers and your sellers go through and sign your SBSA. And I would say that this form, although it's not required, I would include it on every single transaction by checking the box in your purchase agreement. And as you scroll through to item number G on page 14, for local advisories, if you are in any marketplace that you happen to be working, there are local advisories usually. Special advisories or disclosures that they happen to do within their particular area that you can usually get from the multiple listing service or by one of the agents within the transaction if they're a local to that area. But you can include the AV disclosures for our local market area or any other disclosures that are the local advisories right here on this document on page 14 to include them within your transaction. So for example, the SBSA is not required per your California residential purchase agreement. Technically, any local disclosures are not necessarily required in the contract. We're pulling them into the contract by using this inclusion on your SBSA, or you could do it in your purchase contract as well. So on the last page, you're just going to have your signature carryover page on your SBSA. So notice of your supplemental property tax bill is a good example of this. Now, you're not required to give a notice to your supplemental property tax bill, but it comes up so frequently with the buyers that they get a notice of supplemental property tax bill after they close escrow and they don't know what it is. They've never been described what a supplemental property tax bill is. So a lot of agents will use this supplemental property tax bill as a way to tell the buyers or to prepare the buyers after the close of escrow that they can receive an additional tax bill for supplementary taxes. But this is an excellent example form. You do not have to do this secondary form if you do your SBSA, because the supplemental property tax, this entire section that you see written on your screen right now, is included in the SBSA. There's a whole section inside the SBSA that talks about a supplemental property tax bill even more in detail than the actual form itself. So this is just a little example of why the SBSA is almost better than some of these other forms that you could be using because it has those attached inside of it. Next up is a square footage and lot size disclosure. I really love this form, and I highly encourage that you guys use this form if there is a discrepancy in square feet. And yes, you should be checking this as an agent. So when you're showing a property, the multiple listing service is going to tell you what the square footage is on that particular property. So it's going to say the square feet of this house is 2,500 square feet. But then you get your appraisal back and the appraisal says, well, the square feet is 2,200 square feet. Well, that's a pretty big discrepancy. There's 300 square feet that's off. That you'd want to know. So you could say, according to the multiple listing service, this is the square feet. According to appraisal number 1, this was the square feet. And maybe when you pull up the title records or when you pull those up in the system when you're searching public records, it might show the square feet is completely different. It's not your job to say why the square feet is different. You're just saying, hey, I found a discrepancy. Here's what the discrepancy is. And then you're moving forward in the transaction. Now, you do want to note to the buyers that you have found different square feet. So if you have multiple reports of multiple different square footage of that property, I would highly recommend you pull this report into your transaction. Next up is a relatively newer form. It's your solar advisory form and questionnaire. Now, the seller does have the obligation to tell the buyer of any leased or liened items with the property, and a solar advisory is a good one because solar can get pretty convoluted. Some systems are leased, some systems are owned, some systems is attached to the property tax bill because they might even get a PACE loan or a HERO loan to pay for the solar installation. So there's a lot of ways that solar is attached to the property, and it's not always easy to find or to understand how the seller did this. So it's very confusing for us as agents to understand all of these different details. And honestly, even the sellers sometimes don't fully understand how their solar is tied into the property, especially if it's on a tax bill instead of a loan. If it's a loan, they get a bill for it. They see it all the time. But if it was attached in a different manner, like they did a HERO loan or a PACE loan, they'll say, no, I don't have any loans on the property. Well, that's because it was attached somewhere that is not quite seen by the seller on a daily basis. It's included maybe in the taxes instead. So this form is describing all the ways that solar can be attached to a property and what solar means and what they need to check and look out for. And this questionnaire is a beautiful form to have your clients read for both the seller and the buyer to understand the solar that is on their particular property. The second part is a checklist of, is the seller aware of, again, to note any of these items for how their systems and their components work when it comes to the solar on their property. So this is your solar advisory, and it would be for the seller to provide to the buyer. So that is going to wrap up a big, bulky amount of disclosures for today. Thank you for joining me today on the road to sold. If you like the information, hit subscribe below. We're going to make sure to give you a lot of great informative information on our channel.